Welcome back to the Dueling Banjos podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the drama film Tar, written and directed by Todd Field, starring Cate Blanchett, Nina Hoss, Mark Strong, and some other European names that would be embarrassing to try to pronounce. But Cate Blanchett is the star of the show in this, obviously the central character in just about every scene. And the film obviously chronicles sort of her decline from a position of power. I would say what fuels that decline in terms of her own character is some sort of a strange desire to not just disband from the people that she felt wronged her or didn't do what she wanted to do, but actually crush them and ruin their reputation and hurt them. And that's seen in her relationship with Krista. I think that's the sort of primary source for, at least in narrative, her ultimate fall from grace was the accusations that came from that. And it was all based off, that they had some sort of romance at one time that didn't pan out. And instead of being sort of a mature adult and just breaking it off and trying to remove that personal emotional investment into the relationship, she went out of her way to basically ruin the life of this young woman. And in doing so, and you see that reflected in how she treats other people. Her attraction to Olga as well costs that first cellist the job in that solo, and in that final piece. And her attraction to other women obviously hurts her relationship with Sharon as well. And so I think sort of lust is what fuels a lot of her decisions, but then ultimately when that doesn't work out, she can't just deal with it on sort of a mature adult level. She has to go out and step on all of these people and make sure that they're crushed emotionally, in some cases leading to death, the suicide of Krista. So
you mentioned lust, and I think there's an interesting way you can connect the two big strands of the storyline, which is Tar's aesthetic regard for the canon and classical music, which she clearly has. She grew up on Bernstein. She loves music. And then the decline of her career based off of her inability to deal with problems of lust or erotic desire in a professional setting. You can unite these two pretty clearly if you regard, and I think you should, erotic desire as being a category of aesthetics. Because you see, Tar treats the young women who she's erotically attracted to the same way she treats the score, the same way she treats Mahler, the Mahler score, and how she approaches music. Her desire in conducting is to be a partner of the composer, to sort of possess some of the aesthetic achievement of the composer, to basically say, we are partners. It's a possessive desire in her when she conducts. And this is exactly what it is in her. She started the Accordion Academy Fellowship for Women. She is cultivating young women as directors. She has a desire to possess them sexually. And when they are unwilling to do that, she turns to professional sabotage. And so this desire for possession, saying, I admire something, I must possess it. This is the key to her tragic character. Because the difference between the sexual instinct and erotic desire is that the sexual instinct wants to possess what it admires. But real eroticism understands that it always has to step back from what it admires. And Tar doesn't quite figure that out. And that's the source of her tragic dilemma, which is that when she admires, she needs to impose, she needs to take it over, she needs to control it. And she gets very agitated when that doesn't happen. And this is why I say the girls that she grooms are in some sense the same as her conducting approach.
The girls? Well, I mean, she obviously, it's laid out very clearly. She obviously invests a lot of, or sees the composer as having a significant amount of power over the orchestra. Almost, you know.
And she's almost envious of it in a way.
No, I don't think she's envious of it.
There are hints.
That's why that's what translates to her relationships with other people, is the power she has over them. And then once she feels like that power is not yielding the results that she wants from the person she has power over, that's when she switches to, they need to be crushed.
Okay, well, I think I understand what you're saying, but let's take it on two tracks here. So there's a lot of discussions in the movie where she's talking about who the conductor is and what the point of the conductor is.
Yeah.
So everything she says is based off the idea that the conductor is not quite as crucial as the composer, but is almost as crucial. Wouldn't you say that's true? She's the interpreter.
I say it's more crucial. I mean, she has
even worse.
Has an admiration for the composer, certainly, but the conductor, which I may have accidentally actually used the word composer when I meant conductor in the previous point I was making. But yeah, she views the conductor as the one that basically brings the voice to the piece. And that's laid out in how she says, well, you can take a piece written by whoever and have it come across this way and reflect these themes, depending on how the conductor approaches it. And so in that way, the conductor is sort of the omniscient power that's dictating not just the orchestra, but the piece itself.
Yeah, well, I think the movie is attacking the concept of the conductor. Because you notice the conductor in the classical music world only came about with the decline of canonical composers. I mean, we still have composers, but none of them are household names. So it's like we have a closed canon, and the conductor now becomes the primary figure to interpret the pieces that we have established as great. But the movie is attacking that perspective, because if you notice with Olga, what is Olga when she plays Elgar? Olga is a conduit for what Elgar has already done. Olga's not interested in the conductor. You see in that meeting she has with Tar, she doesn't even know who was conducting when Jacqueline Dupre was playing the cello concerto and she got inspired to learn the Elgar piece. She doesn't care, because she is a conduit for what the composer has already done. So the best that a conductor can be is an assistant to the composer, and the worst is a hindrance in some way. Would you say the movie is attacking the concept of the conductor as a primary aesthetic auditor?
No, not at all. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite. It's building up the conductor as the powerful driving creative force behind some. So I equate it to the art form that I'm familiar with and work in, which is movies. The director, well, is the director an assistant to the writer?
No, because it's not the same, because movies are primarily visual.
Well, they're experiential in the way that good movies are experiential in the same way that a good classical music piece is. And presumably you have words on a page in a screenplay, and the equivalent of the players in an orchestra are the actors, the conduit, as you said, to the words on the page. But really it's the director that gets the voice and the artistic resonance out of what's there, out of the pieces that he has.
I don't
I
think,
think
but I don't think
reflected in the
you
conductor.
can't make the equivalent statement with music.
I think you can.
No, the with film, the primary aesthetic medium is the visual. You would agree to that. It's not the only one, but it's the primary one, right?
I I don't
It
know
has
that
to
I would
be. It's a
agree with
movie.
that. Well,
In music, the primary
that's weird. That's
aesthetic
like saying,
medium is auditory. It's meant to be heard.
well, it's auditory in film too. I guess I'm just conflating the roles.
But
You
it's
know,
not. It's you can't make the one-on-one comparison between the conductor and the film director. What has the conductor actually? The score exists.
well,
So the composer has made the score. The players are there to play the score. The conductor, you could say, is there to interpret the playing of the score. But it is a
direct
far more
players as to how to do it better or worse depending on the vibe.
okay. But what the movie is clearly critical of the pretensions of the conductor. You notice it's mocking all those records where the conductor is in some, pretentious pose on the record as if I am the one bringing this composer's work to you.
Okay, so let me ask you a potentially synonymous question. Depends on how you take it, I guess. Is the movie critical of Tar?
Well, Tar is a tragic person being portrayed. So she is shown to have authentic aesthetic appreciation. She does love music, and that's the most sympathetic aspect of her character. What she doesn't understand, and what the movie is saying is her tragic flaw, is that she desires to possess what she admires. And it's the same track. It's whether it's Mahler, who she wants to take over. She wants to partake of Mahler's achievement. And it's also the same with the girls that she grooms. She wants to possess them because she admires them. It's the same phenomenon at work.
Okay, but you have to. They're just notes on a page that can be played poorly.
No, the movie says other. They put in Kaplan at the end of the movie because she had to go because she was mired in scandal. They booted her off. They put Kaplan in. They still recorded. You don't think that's a commentary on the notion that the conductor is somewhat arbitrary?
No.
Yes, it is.
I mean, that's with any collaborative sort of endeavor, is if somebody becomes unavailable to do it, you replace it with somebody else.
Okay, but you're missing the irony that the movie's trying to convey, which is Tar has the idea that I'm the one that can interpret. It's my interpretation.
Kaplan's interpretation may have been different and worse. We don't know because it's not, I guess, shown.
Well, yeah, we don't know. And, you see that it was probably Sharon who was instrumental in getting Kaplan Tar's score. She finds it missing in her apartment. But the point is that the conductor has all these notions that I am in a partnership with the composer, when in actuality, the conductor is very much subordinate to the composer and is most often actually a hindrance to the composer. So the movie is critical of the conductor's pretensions to aesthetic sharing.
Well, I guess I asked you the question of whether it's critical of Tar because I want to see what I want to get your take on is whether you think Tar is and conductor, if we talked about the conductor as an idea, represent the same things. So if you're saying it's critical of the conductor, are you saying the movie's critical of Tar? Or is it taking a different approach to Tar, the person, than it is a conductor, the position?
They're both enmeshed. So I would say, abstracting it away from the tragedy of Tar, we have a critique on the conductor. There is probably a critique on the pretensions of the conductor because the movie is conveying that the work itself only the work itself is the achievement. And all that's required for the work is conduits, like Olga. She's
Well,
so all the minutia of harping over, oh, we got to get this decrescendo right and stuff. You can do it, but you notice Olga is not in those conversations. She doesn't really care. She says, I have had an aesthetic experience from listening to Elgar. I want to be a conduit for Elgar.
okay.
And that is all she needs.
Is it?
She has no desire to possess the piece like Tar does.
Okay. But I guess what I'm driving at is I actually think the film has an admiration for Tar's love of the aesthetic of complex art, which she genuinely has.
That's true.
And it's the world around her that doesn't share. She's not long for a world that no longer cares about aesthetics, that doesn't think about these things in terms of them. And so I actually think it seems like a very minor scene, but early on in the film, she's approached after that the New Yorker interview, and approached by just some random person that was listening to her, who says some really kind of simplistic things. You know, off the top of my head, I can't specifically remember what she said, but it was like not at all near the complex understanding of things that Tar was laying out in that interview, right? That showed a greater understanding. It was more almost an admiration that she had that complex understanding. So I admire you for being able to think that deeply about the piece, as opposed to I'm capable of thinking that deeply about the piece myself. And so you have a person who's trying to engage and still highly values the aesthetics of complex art, now making it in a world where people don't respect or understand or care to understand complex art. And that may be what you're part of what you're getting at with Olga too, is, you know, does she have the same sort of philosophizing about the motivations and the intents of Elgar, or does she just have fun playing that particular piece?
Okay, well, I dispute a number of things you just said. First of all, what the movie is trying to convey is that what Tar says in the New Yorker interview is hogwash. It's nonsense. It's not. You see, it's the egoism of the conductor to basically say, not only am I the gatekeeper of the composition to some degree, I actually can get into the composer's brain and talk about his relationship, Mahler's relationship with Alma. And you notice Francesca did not like when Tar was talking about that, because what Tar becomes is so egotistical that she believes that she is in some sense equal, if not greater, than the composer whose work she is interpreting. So that interview was not profound to me, and I don't think the movie is trying to portray her as saying profound things. It's trying to reflect the egotism of a conductor who believes that they are on par with the creative achievement of the composer.
But egotism is necessary to be a great artist and understand the aesthetics of great
art. It is, but why can't Tar compose? The whole movie, she's having problems composing her own work.
Well, I mean, again, it's the difference between a writer and director of a movie. Some directors can't write themselves, but they can interpret the writings of others, take artistic command of the writing of a screenplay and turn it into a film. I think that's how she's perceiving things. You know, it is my job to culminate this thing in a great work of experiential art to give the audience an aesthetic experience. But she's finding more and more that audience don't really care that much about thinking deeply about aesthetic experiences. And there's a superficiality now, even to the people that still attend something like classical music concerts. There's a pretentiousness to those people of they haven't done the work to understand music theory. They don't know about the history of the composers. They don't understand all of these things that comprise a complex work of
But
art.
they don't need to.
But they want to present themselves as like being a part of that high culture when that's been sort of the debasement of high culture, is a bunch of people who have not done the work to understand in a complex way.
Okay. Why did they show the Bernstein clip at the end after she's had her fall and gotten booted off the Berlin, Phil? They showed the Bernstein clip where he says, you don't need to know about sharps and flats. Music is about what it makes you feel. And whose aesthetic perspective in the movie, but whose perspective is reflected in Bernstein's words? It is not Tar's.
No, it's not Tar's.
It is Olga's, who does not talk in terms of technical language. All she says is, I was inspired to be a conduit for that. And of course, she has the greatest effect. She would conduct better from her cello than Tar would conduct from the podium, because she understands that we are conduits. We are not partakers of the composer's achievement. We are conduits for what the composer has already expressed in the notes. And so you can make these broader points about, what the decline of sophisticated audience and whatnot. But Tar's problem is she has legitimate aesthetic appreciation and love for music. She cannot give up the desire to possess it as her own.
I understand that. You keep repeating that, and I'm saying that you have to take possession of it in order for it to even get made. Notes on a page are just notes on a page until they're performed. The aesthetic experience doesn't come from me looking at the notes on a page. It comes from me hearing them played out.
Right, and the conductor is somewhat arbitrary. The conductor keeps time.
But it's shown in many instances that the conductor is not arbitrary, because
she doesn't.
She might say
you're missing the subtlety here. Tar says the conductor is so much more than keeping time. The conductor molds the composer's intentions, and the movie shows that perspective to be flawed. Why do they stash Kaplan?
How does it show it to be flawed?
Because they show that you don't. This idea that Tar's Mahler 5 is her Mahler 5. It's necessary for the piece to come off. Is shown to be nonsensical because she's taken off and she's replaced with Kaplan, and they record the piece anyway.
Okay, can there be a bad performance of a great piece of composition?
Sure, a conductor could really ruin it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you're putting presumably some stake on the conductor's capabilities. If what's on the page is just so good that nobody else can possess it or turn it into anything, you would never be able to have a bad performance of it unless you're just literally playing wrong notes.
You're strong-arming the argument. No one has said the performer approaches the composer from the standpoint of, I am carrying out essentially the aesthetic command you've given in the notes. That is how Olga plays. She is not interested in making it hers, in saying, I am the equal of Elgar. She is saying, I am a conduit for what Elgar has given us. That is the difference.
I understand that. But I'm saying then it is not the composer, it's not strictly the composer that makes it a great work of art. It's the capabilities of the performers, and yes, the direction in which the conductor takes it.
That has a role, but it is a highly subsidiary role to the creative act of the composition.
I mean, I guess I haven't looked at the actual sheet music of Mahler's 5, but in generally in music composition, there isn't a ton of direction. There's like one words that dictate maybe
No,
speed or emphasis.
Mahler has all kinds of directives. You can
Okay,
do it in
well,
the form of
maybe
no, you
he
can do it
does.
in the
I
form of
certainly
dynamics and markings. You can do it in the form of actual words, which Mahler puts descriptive words for how he wants something to
okay. Well,
work.
I haven't seen it, but for a number of composers, they don't write as if it's like stage directions. They write decrescendo to mezzo piano, or crescendo to fortissimo. Like it's very basic directions that indicate volume, speed, occasionally intent, I guess, but there's really not a ton of direction, which means interpretation is open.
It is, but the movie's attacking the notion that the conductor as a tinkerer is at all worthy of the aesthetic regard we give to the composer. The movie's attacking that notion.
Well,
And it's showing that, and we're not going to reduce Tar to the conductor, because that would take away from the more idiosyncratic elements of her personality. But it's shown that she has a consistent approach to everything. So her personal life, she herself despises the transactional nature that others, the transactional relationships that others attempt to get from her. So she wants to believe that Krista and Francesca are in awe of her creative genius, when in actuality, they are going along with all the things she asks of them because they recognize that she is good for their professional career. It's very transactional.
sure.
And it's transactional for Tar too, but she doesn't know it.
Well,
Because
how do you become a composer of Berlin Phil? Or a conductor, excuse me, of the Berlin.
well, you do so because presumably you have some insight into music interpretation. But this movie is showing that the pretensions of the conductor are very overrated.
I don't know how they can. It says, I mean, I don't know how. So you're saying people just get lucky in terms of selection of being conductor for these things? There has to be some measure of a conductor's capability for somebody to look at two people and say, I choose you over this person to be conductor of this prestigious orchestra. They don't just pull some schmuck off the street that could do this.
They basically did at the end. The whole point is that at the beginning of the movie, Tar has this notion that she's a great conductor, and Kaplan is like he's just a waif who wants to copy from the great conductors. He's the one who's conducting the recording at the end. So the satire, satire is the wrong word, but the irony of the movie is that the conductor, feeling themselves as a necessary participant in what the composer has done, is not correct.
I mean, again, we don't see the results of the actual recording, whether they're better or worse or interpreted as better or worse once Tar leaves. So, I mean, I guess it'd be ironic. You're saying it's ironic just by the very fact that they put somebody else in there. But to me, what would be more ironic and be more at your point is if you saw Kaplan go in and conduct the orchestra and it was just as good or interpreted as just as good. Like there was a deliberate scene showing people basically applauding it and praising it just as much as if Tar would have done it. That would have been the ironic thing.
Maybe. I mean, the point is why does the modern classical music industry, and all industries to some extent, end up being a patronage game, which is what it becomes. It becomes a form of transactional patronage. It's because all of this notion that the conductor has special insight is overblown. And you see this also in the whole thing of we gotta have fair auditions. So, that screen that they put over the audition to be like, you can't look at the person and judge from the person because you might have some hidden biases or something.
Yeah.
You can't stop it because Tar noticed Olga beforehand. She wanted Olga on the basis of the fact that she admired her as a young woman.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't actually eradicate these biases. And that's because erotic desire is, in some sense, a branch of aesthetics. And so, that scene in Juilliard where she's reprimanding the guy for thinking in identity terms about a composer.
Yeah.
Now, the movie may be saying she's right in that scene, in the sense of if you being reduced to irrelevant minor considerations about who you are instead of having the work be looked at fairly on its own is difficult. But it also shows that she is not immune from them herself. Because the same things that cause you to have aesthetic appreciation for music or any other art are in some sense the same things that cause you to have an aesthetic appreciation for a person, namely in the form of erotic desire or any other reason why you would like someone.
Well, no, I think in one instance it's kind of superficial, erotic desire for someone just based off their appearance before you've ever come to know anything about them is far more superficial than an appreciation for a Beethoven symphony that you understand in a complex way.
You can say it's superficial, but it's still there.
Well, okay, but it's not a direct parallel like you're saying. In one case, it's a very complex understanding of why the aesthetic experience is what it is. In the other, it's basically a simple worldly pleasure that you enjoy. I find this young woman attractive or whatever. I want to get with her or sleep with her or help her versus other people that I don't. All right, do you see how one is a far more complex and nuanced?
But that's only because you're judging it that way. I mean,
we know what happens.
No, we know if you have erotic desire for someone, that often occurs instantly because the person just looks good.
In fact, that actually in the film is what's treated as arbitrary. Because it was Krista, then it was Francesca, then it's Olga.
Yeah, these are all good-looking women.
I know, that come through, and so that's what's portrayed as sort of a surface level. Actually,
you can attack it that way, but it can't be denied. You like what has an aesthetic effect on you. If that happens to be a woman's physical beauty, that is in some sense no different than the audience member who doesn't know anything about notes, but who likes the music he hears, right? It's the same thing. There's no deep, complex knowledge of the person or the score or what went into the composition. It's just I heard it and it had an aesthetic impact on me. I've seen the woman and she's having an aesthetic, erotic impact on me.
But then you don't think how do you interpret the final scene of the film? Because it seems to me the film is making an ironic point about Tar, not about the conductor in that instance. It's basically saying this person who was conducting the best orchestra in the world is now at some ridiculous convention conducting a bunch of nobodies. And the distinction between where she is and who she is what's ironic. But that can only be ironic if you do see Tar as an elevated intellect and an actual creative or artistic force in her position.
Well, it's ironic because it shows that all of these notions that make a conductor some great artist herself ultimately don't matter if you do not have the proper approach to the professional status of the classical world. So the desire to possess is her tragic flaw. She wants to possess those who have an erotic aesthetic effect on her in the world, and she wants to possess the score that she admires in an aesthetic sense. the irony is that that desire for possession is impossible. Because when you really admire something, it requires stepping back. So the whole notion of all these girls have great talent, we don't know because it's all confused in the fact that Tars likes them as an erotic.
Okay, so again, I'll translate it to a different art form is, so if you're doing a theater production of a Shakespeare play or a movie version of a Shakespeare play and you're changing the time, this historical time period that it takes place in, you're adapting things, is that not possessing the work and making it your own?
It is.
Okay. And some of those turn out good, you know?
To the degree that the theater director is respecting what Shakespeare has given. So there's a difference between, well, I'll update some costumes, which may be acceptable, to I'm going to change the words. Or I'm going to...
So the equivalent to that in Tar would be if she was saying, I want to change this note. I want these notes to change.
Right.
I think
that would be, sacrilege and more egregious than anything she does. But the point is that the notes are already there. The commands are by and large already there. You can plug in anyone into the conductor position, and you have very good players in the Berlin Phil, the best players in the world for an orchestra, and you will get the composer's vision conveyed with or without some genius conductor.
Well, you may not get it, conveyed as well or as effectively. I mean, again,
it's possible,
but
the movie doesn't hacking that idea.
I don't feel like the movie exactly lays out that point, because it would show people raving about the performance, raving about the recording. Once Kaplan stepped in, it would have been like,
well, you want to see that, but to me, it's enough to just see that she was swapped because she's become professionally scandalous. She can't be leading the Berlin Phil anymore. Let's get at a different question, which is, do Francesca and Krista have real talent? Is there conducting ability there? The movie says you can't answer that question because the considerations for the quality of the conductor or even of the performer is intimately connected with the person's regard for them, the aesthetic effect that Francesca and Krista have on her, and you can't decouple them. They're having an erotic impact, which is a form of aesthetic impact. And the effect that they have muddles, obscures any so-called objective consideration of their actual talent. And so the whole premise of the movie is an attack on this notion that there can be objectivity in very difficult considerations of ability when all the world is run by aesthetic impact. And so the professional, I will be objective and just judge everyone objectively is shown to be impossible. And Tar can't figure it out. And presumably no one in that industry can figure it out because people are always having aesthetic effects the same way as art objects are.
Yeah, I just think that, to reduce it the way you have been would defeat the purpose of the ending, which is to create a stark contrast between a bad orchestra and a conductor who was at the top, and the artistic and aesthetic divide that exists there. It's not ironic or meaningful if you just say that the point taken earlier on was that the conductor is arbitrary.
The conductor may not be perfectly arbitrary. The conductor becomes a hindrance when she seeks to partake with the composer who is already given the aesthetic object. All he requires is skilled conduits for its expression. He does not require tinkering. He does not require a partner now that he has produced it. And so the dictatorial nature of Tar, she's in command of the orchestra. She runs everything. This is a defense against an essential inferiority that she feels to the composer. Tar can't compose. She struggles the whole movie. It's a defensive reaction to the fact that I am dealing with someone who I very much admire, and I want to be a partner with that person. I want to say I have had a hand in the Fifth Symphony of Mahler. It's my Fifth Symphony just as much as it's Mahler's.
I don't know if I would agree with that, because you can interpret a work of art in a way that perhaps the creator of that work of art didn't intend, and simultaneously not say, this is my work now. I mean, I interpret film all the time. I don't say, oh, now this is my movie because I've interpreted it.
No, because you've accepted that you are a conduit for explaining what the artist meant in the work. You're not the person who is going to bring it alive. It's like, this is why you can't compare screenwriting to this, because the script is not a movie. You actually need the director to make it a movie. The music score, it's not making sounds by sitting there. It requires players, but those players understand that everything that the composer needed has been given to me. My only job is to be the proper conduit. It's not to meddle with what the composer put there. It's not to override or to say I am a part of this composition in any real sense. It's I am the expressor of what the composer has already achieved.
I mean, again, I think the same could be said for the writer. There's a certain achievement in dialogue for characters in a movie. Dialogue actually can carry an actor's performance, whereas the notes on a page can't carry a bad violinist performance.
No, you still need the actor to say the words.
So I'm kind of curious in the idea of, who the victim is in the film, who the victims are, and whether Tar is totally a villain. Because presumably Tar, for the people who reciprocate what she wants out of them, yields them a lot of reward. Now, obviously, you can take a issue with that mindset that, she's favoring certain people or whatever, but presumably she's doing right by the people that are conceding to what she wants, right? So if she wants a relationship out of them and they're giving them that, presumably she's building them up while that exists. And once it falls apart, her tragic flaw is what takes over. And so I don't know that this certainly isn't a movie where I think there's like an obvious hero and an obvious villain, especially since Tar is the main character. It's supposed to be a little more complex than that. But insofar as like who the victims are, who's the greatest victim of this movie?
Well, it's Tar's tragedy. You would say Krista's a major victim. You would say, I mean, the victims are, all the victims are caused by Tar's problem, including her own victimhood, which is that it's this desire to possess what she admires. So with Krista and Francesca understood the transactional nature of the relationship they had with Tar. They understood that
Does Olga understand?
Olga understands what Tar might intend, but Olga doesn't need Tar. The difference with Olga, I mean, she's presented in the movie, she's basically like a perfect woman, which is she understands her own natural charisma. She understands that her role as a performer on the cello is to give expression to the composer. She has no desire for possession. She has no desire to be possessed for status or professional gain. This is the difference between Olga and Krista and Francesca. They stick around, they cater to the sexual demands of Tar because they think this will help my career. And when it's exposed to be highly transactional, where Tar says, you do what I say, you let me possess you, otherwise I'm going to sabotage your career, they hate her for it. Olga doesn't need that. Olga knows her talent. She's confident in her talent. She's confident in her natural charisma. And she says, I will not play the status game. And that natural, the natural charisma that exudes from her gets her to the top very quickly. She's a soloist for the Berlin Phil.
Well, I guess, if you're saying like, well, just natural talent translates to things, but I think, an accurate reflection of the world is that most things are transactional.
They are.
You can't get ahead without transaction.
Most people probably can't, but there's a certain charisma and sort of natural joie de vivre you can possess that actually makes people admire you. Now, it may make people want to possess you, but you hold them back from doing that. Krista wanted to be possessed. Presumably she accepted it for a while, and then she paid the price because it was ugly to her. She knew what was going on. And the fact that she said, I'm not going with what you demand of me to Tar, ruined her professional career. So this is the notion of we have professional status in the art world, where there's this idea that we're all going based off who's the best artist. It's an objective assessment of quality, which you can't actually do because people are having aesthetic effects on others. There's favoritism going on the basis of those aesthetic effects. And it's an entanglement that can't be untied.
Okay, but is it, I think then, I mean, there's this aesthetic things and appreciations going on and biases as a result of those aesthetic things. But, that doesn't change the fact that for most people, even if they have a high degree of talent, things have to be transactional. I mean, what is Francesca and Krista's other options if they don't have the natural talent to do what Olga is doing?
They don't have any. They went into conducting, which is shown by the movie to be far more fraudulent than the performance on an instrument, which can't be denied when it's very good.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think that there is, you're really trying to reduce the degree of aesthetic or artistic importance that the conductor has. I mean, Francesca is shown as having interpretations of the work. She doesn't share, after that New Yorker interview, Tar's interpretation, but she doesn't totally discredit it.
No. But the point is that what we get from Francesca, where she's not really speaking honestly the whole movie because she's under the thumb of Tar, but what we get from Francesca is a greater degree of respect based off her own humble position. So she says, I'm approaching the great Mahler. It's my job to respect what he's done. Whereas Tar is on top. She says, it's my role to shape what he's done because in some sense, I'm an artist on par with him as the conductor. So the point is that the conductor has to approach the composer from a very subordinate standpoint.
Well, then maybe it's saying, this is just an idea I developed right now that I didn't think about before, but maybe it's saying that what the conductor is necessary for actually is a translation to the audience watching it as to why they ought to value high art. And if they take ownership, modern ownership of an older work, it can remain relevant in mainstream culture. So if Tar ties Mahler's work to something people can relate to, as opposed to just like this thing in the past is something I admire, but she says, no, it's actually something more. It's about his relationship and the dynamics of his relationship with his wife and that circumstance. But now it's moving into something where people, whether they genuinely relate to it or not, at least have some sort of motivation to try to engage with the work and see that. But if you treat the conductor and the players to a degree as just vessels of a bygone work, then there is nobody to translate that aesthetic experience and the importance of it to the audience.
But that's a possessive instinct.
It needs to be possessive to keep it relevant in the mainstream culture.
So it's a possessive desire that comes about either on the basis of envy, which I've been saying, but let's take your point. It's a possessive desire that comes about because of the lack of confidence that this has meaning for anyone anymore. So in other words, you say, well, Mahler just simply can't persist unless we involve him with artists that are alive and can be seen. So Mahler must be made a partner with the conductor that is up there that everyone can see. Otherwise, he will perish. No one will care. If that's what you're saying, then the point would be that Mahler's own achievement needs interference, usurpation to survive.
Well, that's always been the case.
But it hasn't.
We didn't dictate what works of literature have survived and what works of art have survived. We grew up and were told what is recognized as the best of the best.
If you want to be a skeptic about it,
if our culture continues to move to a place where we no longer value those things, you need somebody to come in and explain the value of those things to people. And if you don't have that translator, if your expectation is that everybody's just supposed to come to those realizations of the value of these high works of art, they're not going to in a consumptive culture where it's just easier to listen to a 3 or 4 minute pop song than it is to listen to a 2-hour symphony.
Okay, but the movie refutes that. So the brand of Tar is thrown out at the end. I don't think they lost any ticket sales. The brand of the Berlin Phil still played Mahler. So the point is that you're saying, well, Tar and the Berlin Phil, those brands that we can see in the world today, are necessary for Mahler to persist.
I think that there is a necessity for other people to continue the respect and reverence for these great artists that we have. And once that respect is lost in the people who are consuming it or who are viewing it, they will die out,
Well, maybe you're right.
This is a case I make in film all the time, is like, if you decide you're just going to make something for entertainment and you don't even try to justify what you've made on any deeper level, you don't try to say that it's exploring something deeper, it's dealing with other themes, you just make it as a hobby for entertainment, that's how it's going to be interpreted. And that's an easier mindset, one that's more damaging to culture at large, but it's an easier mindset than saying, I'm actually going to make something that means something and tell people what I'm exploring with this stuff, what it means. And once you engage people in that way, if you can convince them that that is the greatest aesthetic experience in consuming a film is to think about the deeper levels, presumably a respect for higher art will come back. But we don't have the people out there advocating for the meanings of these great works of art anymore.
Okay, well, if that's, you can have that as a theory, but the movie certainly shows that it debunks that with Olga, who just wants to play Elgar because Elgar has had an effect on her. And whenever she plays Elgar, she has an aesthetic impact. That testifies to the sustained power of that concerto that does not need tinkering and constant invasive meddling to survive. It just needs people who appreciate it and who are willing to be converts for it.
Okay, but she may be someone who develops a natural appreciation for it. But if you want to maintain an intellectually nuanced culture, that has to be translated to people who don't naturally develop that appreciation. So maybe she sees it and she sees the value in it just by nature. She's attracted to it and then wants to perform it. But if she's not doing what Tar does and going out and saying, here are the complex meanings, here's why this piece is so interesting and unique and meaningful, here are some of the elements that make it the aesthetic.
No, because she trusts what Bernstein said, which is that music has a power that cannot be conveyed in words. The minute you attempt to try to explain it in words, you're invading its purpose. So maybe you're right. Maybe this stuff will go away forever because we just don't have people that can take that impact without interpretation anymore. But the movie suggests otherwise.
I don't think that it necessarily does, because it's like the end, where she's at some weird convention where people are all there for whatever's going on there. It's not really explain what they're all dressed up for, right? But it's like, they're there for something else. They're there as part of a larger entertainment sort of, commercial consumption reason.
Yeah. So
the meaning has never been translated to those audiences.
Okay. So the meaning, that's clearly a consumptive thing that's going on, a participatory consumptive thing, of which high art, what we call high art, is not consumptive in the same way.
Okay, let me ask you a question, just outside, not necessarily outside the context of the movie, but is there a work of music that exists to where if anybody heard it in full, they wouldn't be able to deny the power of the aesthetic experience? Or are we in a time where people...
Well, I don't know. You're saying everybody.
Yeah. Is there a work so powerful because that's the only way things really can persist, is if everybody has the exact same euphoric or whatever aesthetic experience listening.
Why does it need to be everyone? Why can't it just be a subpopulation?
Well, but I guess it could, but then you eventually that group becomes so exclusive that they're no longer relevant in the mainstream. If the taste of high culture is not translated to other people, that group is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and have less and less impact on the culture at large. We didn't always used to be in a place in society and in culture where the majority of people did not value high art. Back in the days of Shakespeare, when Shakespeare was performed, he was performed at bars.
Okay, so
Beethoven was performed for peasantry.
Bring back,
and they appreciate it.
Bring back the kings, and then we don't need conductors. I mean,
what does that have to do with
because
anything?
you're asking about
it's a mindset.
No,
I want to go.
You're basically saying, you're basically saying that The appreciation of high culture is an aristocratic disposition that we have undermined.
Yeah, but
Okay,
but I'm saying that it's a disposition that everybody could have, and there was a time where more people, regardless of where they were in society, had it. You go down to the bars today, if somebody were putting on a Shakespeare play at a bar downtown Anoka, nobody would go watch it.
That's fine. I mean, why are you asking? Why? I mean, you're basically saying all this stuff needs to be for everybody to have real value. No one has ever said that. No one has ever said that.
It needs to be. It needs to be meaningful enough to enough people to be the major cultural identity.
It doesn't need to be that.
Yes, it does.
It doesn't matter if there's only a subset of the population that knows or cares about Mahler. The point is that there is that population that understands it and that has a great aesthetic experience in confronting it. And the purpose of the performers is to be a conduit for that aesthetic experience, not be a usurper for the purposes of drawing in others who don't understand it naturally.
I disagree. I think that, that is, I mean, maybe the movie says something closer to what you're saying, but I think it just on a general personal perspective that's wrong.
Well, then you disagree with the movie.
Maybe I do, but it just seems to me that if you don't have somebody to tell, because the vast majority of people in the world are not ideological leaders. They're ideological followers. So if you don't tell them what to believe or what is important or things like that, they won't come to that themselves. And so if nobody comes to them and says, this is what you should value, and here's why it's meaningful, then they are just going to go to the bargain basement
then
stuff.
Let them. There's always going to be, always going to be Olga's born who do have it by nature. They feel it by nature. They have the aesthetic impact by nature.
Will there? It seems like
there will be.
Diminishing amounts of people are...
Maybe. I mean, Mahler was never understood, even in a time when you say that people were more refined or aristocratic. Mahler's always been niche. To the people he speaks to, it's very deep, and that's who he wrote it for.
Well, no, I mean, Bach is widely accepted, or over time been widely accepted as one of the greatest composers, maybe the greatest composer ever.
Yeah.
Yet in the scene in Tar, you see the mindset of a modern generation that's like, I don't care what complex thing he wrote.
So it wasn't for him. There's not a problem.
No, but it's showing that that's the I think it's showing that that's the developing mindset among more and more people. That's not the way it used to be. That's not the kind of perspective that we allowed to infiltrate higher culture before. Now we're letting it into a higher culture.
Yeah, maybe that you're making a broader societal point. The movie says that the aesthetic object will always stand on its own basis. Now, you can disagree with that, but that's what the movie says.
Okay. Well, I don't think so, because that scene when that's a dude who's going to Juilliard. Presumably he had the resume or talent to get into Juilliard. And he's choosing to conduct a piece by some nobody.
Well, she's not a nobody.
That's not meaningful. That's less meaningful than... I mean, I've never heard of her. I've heard of a lot of composers. I've never heard of her.
You see that Tar, on a Iceland name, I don't remember her name, but you see that Tar is contemptuous of her, maybe for good reason.
Well, contemptuous on the basis of the case that the guy is making, which is I literally cannot play or appreciate these dudes, Beethoven, Mozart, Bach from the past, because they're a white dude.
So if they're in decline, you can have that as a theory. The movie bears out a hope that on some level, these things are so undeniable, not for everyone, but for enough people who are born, like Olga, and all the other members of the Berlin Phil who presumably have an appreciation enough to want to perform it for a career and take great pleasure in it, and the audience members that show up to the Berlin Phil. It says that these works stand on their own and will always have an aesthetic impact to some group of people, no matter what the general conditions of the society or culture.
I think society is proving that incorrect. Whether that's the take of the movie, I'm still not sure that that actually is the take of the movie. But regardless, I mean, if you don't have a vessel to translate the deeper meanings of high art to people who are not going to naturally understand those, they need the leadership to say, this is what you should value, this is what's great, and here's why.
Yeah, don't do it, but you don't need to do it in words. All you need to do is take up your cello and play. We see that it has an effect on you.
Need it in words.
No, they don't need it in words. I don't think Tar converted anyone to Mahler by her New Yorker interview. It exists. It exists for the people. It exists for the people who receive it in the natural sense. It doesn't exist for anyone else, and that's fine.
Are you denying that that number of people is declining in society, in modern society?
It may fluctuate. Maybe it'll go up in 100 years.
It goes up when people who do not develop sort of ideological views and intelligent ideological views for themselves. It develops when they're told what to believe. And if they're told to believe Shakespeare's a great writer, Beethoven's a great composer, Charlie Chaplin is a great filmmaker, right? Like if they're told these things, they believe them. And once they believe them, they can come around to actually appreciating them.
Yeah, I don't see that borne out at all either. Telling people that something's important when they don't feel it doesn't make them feel it.
Well, it might, actually. Because if I go into a musical piece and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be listening for. I don't know what the point of this is. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be getting out of it. That's different than if you said, pay attention to the violins and what they might mean at this particular part. It's saying something more. I'd be like, oh, okay. I'll listen to the violins at that part and see what it could be saying or how the tone is shifting, right? If more intelligent people who are a part of a high culture decide to assist those who do not have that natural development in understanding and appreciating the value of these things, that's necessary. Or you're just saying, well, we'll take the game, we'll roll the dice on new generations appreciating this stuff, when quite clearly every generation gets dumber and less appreciative of the high art, or what we've previously defined as the high art of the past.
Yeah, to me, on some level, it speaks to those who hear it. And to those who don't, there's nothing that can be done.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Tar, very good drama, very good performance from Cate Blanchett especially, but definitely one worth checking out. And next week, we're going to be talking about the 2011 art house action film Drive. So you're not going to want to miss that on Dueling Banjos.